Thanks very much. Thank you, Anne. Anne's established a theme of working across silos, which I'm going to pick up on in a number of ways. So my name is David de Roure. I'm the current director of the Research Centre. So partly I want to welcome you to the centre. I should say Anne is the founding director of the centre. So not only have we followed each other in presentations, but also in directing the centre. I'm going to talk about linked data. I'm not going to specifically focus on details of cultural heritage big data because the expertise for that is in the room and in the later presentations. I'm going to make a few observations based on the work we've been doing with linked data over many years. I had the privilege of being involved in the hypertext community in the early days of the web and then in the semantic web community in the early days of the semantic web. So I've been on a linked data journey for many years. I looked up I wanted to put a date to that. I looked it up last night to find out what my contribution to the semantic web is, and it turns out that there's a minutes of a meeting somewhere that says one member of the group, and this is the group that defined the web ontology language, OWL. Now notice that, web ontology language, W-O-L, OWL, O-W. And this was troubling them, and I pointed out that in the Winnie the Pooh books by A.A. Milne, this is entirely acceptable that the OWL is called WAL. That went into the minutes of the meeting. So this is my contribution to the semantic web. Unfortunately, it doesn't say that I was the person who made that contribution, but it was me. One of the privileges I have in Oxford, as well as directing this multidisciplinary centre, is responsibility for digital humanities strategy across the university. And this is the first silo point, because in other universities, it's become sort of common to create a department of digital humanities or some kind of centre for digital humanities. And we believe that digital is something you do across all disciplines. It's something that's pervasive. It's not something you want to build another silo for. In Oxford, it's been around for a few centuries. We have plenty of sort of departments that have been there for some time, walls between them. This centre works across those. And the approach for digital humanities was to create a strategy that anyone in the university could sign up to. So, IT services, the Bodleian Library, e-Research Centre, the Oxford Internet Institute, colleges, and all the departments in the humanities division of the university are signed up to this strategy. That's how we're crossing walls. It's going very well. We run annually the second largest digital humanities summer school on the planet. Many people in this room are very much engaged with digital humanities at Oxford, with the various projects that work across these walls, and in delivering that annual event. Without going into detail, but just to demonstrate that we, as a centre, are linked up across the university, and we are the silo busters. This is the sort of digital humanities network across the university, involves many humanities departments. We have other activities. We're quite social. We look at research and scholarship as something that isn't just about the technology, but it's about the social adoption of that technology by scholars, but also by citizens. So that theme cuts across as well. And then there are many other interdisciplinary collaborations around the university that we participate in. But the backdrop to all of this is big data, and Donna's given me that sort of big data in the title. And when Anne created this centre, we were talking a lot about the data deluge. In fact, if you want to cite the data deluge, it's one of Anne's papers. And we didn't call it big data there, but it was big data, and we've always been doing big data. But the pictures we used to show in those days were the Large Hadron Collider at CERN, which is going to generate, we talked about terabytes of data, and it seemed a lot. What's happened, of course, is that we have huge amounts of data being produced and used for research across many different disciplines, as captured in this picture. I had the opportunity a couple of years ago to go to India to chair a big data roundtable on behalf of Research Councils UK, and then talking about big data across all the disciplines. And one of the interesting issues that you can get trapped in with big data is trying to define it, so I'm not going to do that. And actually, Research Councils UK, the 7 research councils who fund research in this country, have quite a pragmatic definition of big data, which basically says not what the number of bytes has to be, but if you've got so much data that you have to do things in a different way, then that's, that methodological change is really what defines big data. So when it's bigger than you can cope with your existing methods. It's also important to distinguish between these three things that get conflated quite a lot: big data, open data, and personal data. And because I'm quite social in this talk, there'll be aspects of all these that come up. This is a picture from the Open Data Institute in London, and it's quite good for teasing these apart, and you can discuss another time examples of big personal, big open, open personal, and the question mark in the middle, which is big open and personal. But people do tend to conflate these, and this is one of the things we see as we work across disciplines. The sort of science view of what big data is and the social science view of what big data is can be quite different. I've come from Durban, as Donna said earlier. I was at the World Social Science Forum yesterday, and on a panel about research ethics in social science, big data. Lots of issues. The other thing to say is, on this sort of technology versus technology adoption piece, there's a really useful term, and I think it's what this whole event is about, and it's this notion of knowledge infrastructure. So this isn't saying there's technology and there are people who are using it. It's saying that this meeting, that the Bodleian Library, that the institutions we participate in, that the research projects, that the websites we use, this is all part of our knowledge infrastructure. So all these discussions really are about knowledge infrastructure, and that sets the scene very well. And my final scene setter positions us quite well in terms of the work that goes on in this centre. The vertical axis is that technology piece, Moore's law. It says, and these are well-published curves by the electronics industry, it says we'll have this much storage, this many processors, this is what our devices will look like as time goes on. But meanwhile, of course, the participation in the digital world by academics and citizens alike, and across the whole world, including developing countries, has been growing in an extraordinary way, and in a less well predicted and understood way, and deserving of study in its own right. And what we've done in the research centre here is embrace the capabilities of computation to do research in new ways to deal with this big data. And at the same time, acknowledging that research across all disciplines and in citizen science as well, is about people engaging with the technology, participating in the digital world through websites, through smartphones, whatever it is, which gives us this really significant fourth quadrant, which is where this big data is produced. It's all our interactions with the digital world. There's transactions that generate the data. It's also where the analytics occur, not just through the big computers, but through the citizen science. So that's pretty much the space that we operate in. And I'm not saying everything has to be this. There's certain things, I flew in last night. I'm glad that air traffic control is still done in the bottom left quadrant and not by Twitter. But yeah, the complex, exciting place is the top right-hand side. It's what we want to talk about today. Another time we can speculate where it goes from there, because you can argue that we're still heading along this axis with more and more people engaged. But one day you run out of people as you carry on this axis. And we're seeing that, I think, in the media and in the entertainment industry today, because there's a lot of sort of fashion at the moment for discussion again about artificial intelligence, the role of the machine intelligence, and that's really what happens as you go up here, but informed by stuff over there. That's for the future. Well, perhaps we can discuss that over a coffee break or something. I just want to make some points about my linked data experience over the years, and I'm actually going to choose a couple of examples which are only subsets of cultural heritage, and hopefully this will map out to the other discussions today. First project I want to mention is one called Elephant. This is a really good example of what happens when you bring collections together using linked data. Not just, we have some, in this case, in the Bodleian Library, the EBO TCP collection, in the Hardy Trust Research Centre in the US. Now, you could say, well, we're using linked data, we can bring it together, and this will help us with resource discovery. And yes, that's true. Giving some sort of aggregated interface. Note the global aspects of this, as Donna mentioned. But actually what happened in this project is you get considerable added value, and you can do things you couldn't do before because of the combination. What you have in the Hardy Trust Research Centre is huge corpus, and not necessarily extremely highly curated metadata, for example, on that scale. What we have in the EBO TCP collection here is a very well understood and curated collection. In combination, you can do things in the Hardy Trust that you couldn't do before because you can get value from what's in the Bodleian and vice versa. So it's a combination of the corpus scale and the collection. And if you want to know more about that, the expertise in this is present in the room and in the building and in the Bodleian. We can discuss it a lot more, but it's a great example of a global thing which is more than the sum of its parts. This is the sort of architecture. It isn't pulling together everything into a giant database, which is one approach, and it's sort of the approach that big computer vendors would sell the finance industry. It's very much about making these things searchable and aligning. I'm going to use some examples now from music. Music is the area I work in personally, and our digital humanities team in the research centre, which has just moved into the next office to me, which is lovely, are very well engaged with this. The computational musicology community, the music information retrieval community, are very active globally and in this country, and have been working with not just the music content, but with the metadata in ways that really give us examples of what can be done with linked data in other domains. So here we see an alignment tool being used to bring together some of the many sort of catalogues, the metadata of various music collections, again, globally, which is called the Semantic Alignment and Linking Tool, which was developed by David de Roure here. Here we have an ontology. Terry can describe this later from MetaMusic, isn't it, that one? And a paper here from these projects on, interestingly, bringing together media industry and academic data sets. And I think this is a really interesting point about the music work. We're working closely with the BBC, who have wonderful collections and a strong tradition of use of linked data, not necessarily open for the whole world to use, but actually internally within the BBC enterprise to achieve operational systems which are very effective. So this is, it's the combination of media industry with the academic work, and it's very interesting. Once you've got these things aligned, once you've got the metadata, just to make the observation that a lot of research can be done at that metadata level, as well as looking importantly at the content itself. So here's some work from an AHRC project at Royal Holloway. And there are many, many sort of results and visualizations that come out of this, but this is music printed in major sensors. You can achieve this kind of global search query by doing the aggregation and the alignment of the metadata. But it's easy to think of this metadata as a bunch of catalogs out there, and we bring them together in an aggregation. What I've learned over many years of work is that the usage of that data actually adds value to the users. And also, exactly as Anne was saying, you don't want to silo this content. So actually having information about an artifact, it would be crazy not to understand its context, not to be able to capture that as well in the linked data. So it's really thinking about linked data not as this sort of lake of data that's out there, but as live and as objects that people, human beings, scholars, and computers are creating and sharing and adding value through that process. So picking up on the media industry point, we have a project about fusing audio and semantic technologies, working with BBC, working with Abbey Road. And the interesting thing about this is this picture. This is about the music industry, but actually you'll recognize it could also be about scholarship. So what happens in music is we record things in studios, in performances. That's captured by recording engineers. It's produced. It's then distributed in various ways. You might be downloading these things from iTunes or whatever. So you're then consuming. And actually what's really interesting is what people do with it then, because you then reuse this and do other things with it. Research data pretty much follows that life cycle as well. And we have the curation and preservation aspects. And through digital affordances, we are really sort of disintermediating that structure. But the music industry is a really interesting example because it's gone digital end to end, nearly end to end. It isn't quite digital into our brains, in a way that science hasn't necessarily achieved. So we're doing some interesting work here comparing the music industry and, for example, we've done work comparing the chemistry lab with the music studio. And not only can you say to the music industry some of the things we learned in science about reproducibility, for example, but now we can start looking at science as performance, which is proving to be a very interesting line. And what we do, the concept we're using in FAST is this notion of the digital music objects. Instead of it being an MP3 or a WAV file, and this recording file that goes through that production, distribution, and consumption and reuse chain, we're capturing a much richer object. This is the digital representation of the artifact. It has an identity, that's very significant. It's quite tricky in music, that's another discussion. It combines things, it's a container, and through usage it gets annotated. You can write things on the container. And I think that kind of thinking coming into cultural heritage is very significant as well, because cultural heritage isn't just about a load of stuff and a load of metadata and inventories as you were discussing yesterday. It's about live content, and it's about people using it. So this sort of object approach at the same time as the linked data approach, we think is very significant. And so as we use the content, we can add value to that content for later reuse. A great example was this recording, capture of Wagner's Ring Cycle last year, which many people in the room were involved in. This is not an audio recording. There is no audio recording. This is a capture of how this was received in the performance over multiple days in Birmingham by capturing physiological signals from audience members, by capturing annotations from musicologists who were experiencing this live. And it's that sort of notion of the reception of the content, again, applying this intercultural heritage, which helps us study things and understand the usage and the things we're delivering for people, but also adds value to those for later reuse. And this concept exists quite explicitly also in the world of social editions, which is, and this is a slide from our colleagues in the Bodleian, where the crowd is coming together with the content in order to annotate, in order to edit. If you like, Wikipedia is a kind of example of this because it's a sort of hierarchy of editors creating content, but applying that to the notion of the critical edition, applying this to the notion of the descriptions of the objects in the museum. So that whole sort of crowdsourcing, but we prefer citizen science to crowdsourcing because it's actually about empowering the citizen, not just using the citizen as some kind of subroutine, really being applied in this context as well. And in the Cultures of Knowledge project, which Anne mentioned, involves a lot of scholars coming together and a lot of content coming together. But as we look at the next phase of that project, which we're developing at the moment, the really interesting challenge is how to enable the crowd to annotate that content. What does it mean to, what is the definitive description of something? And there's a lot of discussion about that. A lot of work with our colleagues in Zooniverse, which we're in the next building, who are now developing humanities projects with an excellent growing humanities team there. So really interesting, crowd meets, citizen meets the cultural heritage content. And to sort of close and hint towards that future from the four-quadrant diagram, this was a project with multiple music archives, including the Internet Archive in San Francisco, where we did some of that crowdsourcing, in fact, grad sourcing, and we paid them to do some music analysis for 1,000 pieces of music, which in itself was a very significant new resource in musicology. But then we've used that to train computers to do the analysis. So this is how you move, as the big data scales up, and you don't have enough humans to deal with it, you get the humans to train the machines, and then the machines deal with it. And that's the automation axis, which we're seeing we have to think hard about. There are a lot of issues in there to do with the automation and keeping the human in the loop, and much to discuss. But again, a project delivering everything as linked data so that it's sustained, so the community can keep adding to this input content and output and making use of that. So just to close then, I think one of the things that I found in digital humanities, in discussions in the UK and actually also in the US, is that people tend not to think about really large-scale projects. And I saw this come through quite spectacularly in meetings, sort of government meetings with the previous science minister, where he was basically saying, yeah, we'll give money to humanities, but you don't think big, give us a big project. And I went away and said to my humanities colleagues, what we needed to do is define a big project here. And people weren't describing really big projects. The value of bringing everything together is huge. We have the technology, we have the skills. It needs some big thinking as well. And one of the great things about this meeting, thank you, Donna, is I think we are thinking on a much larger scale. That's why it's big data. It's because it's a big project. And there's a huge amount to be gained by pursuing this line of thinking. Whole is definitely greater than the sum of the parts. I hope I've demonstrated that. Usage adds value. People sometimes forget that in linked data. Capturing that helps scale the whole operation to deal with the big data and the big project. I think it is live data. It is empowering creativity. And absolutely, as we see through all the presentations today, we know how to do this. So with that, I'll close. Thank you very much.
Thank you.